And welcome to Ladies Can We Talk. This is Debbie Georgatos. Thanks so very much for tuning in. Well, in this new show clock, I have exactly 7 minutes in the starting segment, and I want to jump right in and talk to you about something really important that is going on in America. And in fact, a lot of you probably followed the story this week involving a gentleman who works for the President of the United States. His name is Ben Rhodes. I'm going to back up and just give you a little bit of context for this story. Imagine if you were President Obama and you've been elected and you began your service in 2009 and you wanted more than anything else to negotiate a deal with Iran, the country of Iran. But you knew that, for one thing, national polling at the time, 2009, showed that 88% of Americans had an unfavorable view of Iran. You also knew that Iran was widely known in the defense industry and the foreign service as the single largest terrorist exporting country in the world. They export terrorism, they export funding for terrorists, they are a terrorist sponsoring nation. You also knew that Iran regularly held marches in the streets calling for death to Israel, death to America. And that was the country you wanted to negotiate with, you wanted to come to a deal with. So this was exactly the position that President Obama found himself in. However, he also had the circumstance in his life, President Obama, of hiring a young man named Ben Rhodes. Enter Ben Rhodes, who is, at the time he became involved in the Obama administration, his previous experience was zero military experience, zero foreign service, zero work in anything related to foreign policy. He was, in fact, a graduate student studying fiction writing. His dream was to be a fiction writer. Yet somehow he ended up in the White House as an assistant to President Obama. He was actually his deputy national security advisor. And Ben Rhodes is, however twisted his thinking is, he's a gifted writer. So Ben Rhodes worked with President Obama and came up with, over the years, a way not only to justify negotiating with Iran, not only to justify the Iranian deal, which was negotiated by President Obama and the United States and 5 other countries, but to sell that deal to the American public. All of this came to light and was discussed in a New York Times interview that Ben Rhodes gave recently. Ben Rhodes was interviewed in a very, very, very lengthy New York Times piece by David Samuels. And David Samuels wrote this glowing, you could practically see the drool off the side of his mouth, talking about how in awe this author in the New York Times article was of Ben Rhodes. He's just like this unbelievable genius kid. He's gotten in the White House. He is, in fact, viewed to have a mind meld. That was the word that people in the White House used about Ben Rhodes and President Obama, a mind meld. What Ben Rhodes said in that interview with the New York Times is that he worked to manipulate you. Manipulate the American public, manipulate the media, manipulate think tanks. President Obama, through Ben Rhodes, decided that he was going to sell this rotten deal with Iran to the American people by what Ben Rhodes described as an echo chamber in the media. He created an echo chamber and had people in the media happily, because they were sycophants, repeating everything that they were told to say about this Iranian deal, even though every expert you can possibly imagine here in reality world was saying, this is terrible. And let me just cut to the chase what the Iranian deal did, what the Iranian deal actually brought to America. The Iranian deal that we negotiated included essentially enabling Iran to have nuclear weapons, exactly the opposite of what the deal was supposed to do. It allowed Iran to do its own inspections of those nuclear sites. So instead of the world concerned about Iran having authority to get in and look at these nuclear sites, Iran inspects its own sites. It's kind of like giving the prisoners in a prison the keys and saying, now don't get out. You hold on these keys, but don't get out. It also allowed the transfer back to Iran of approximately 150 billion with a B dollars in frozen assets, giving them more money to continue to fund terrorism. And this deal, which was criticized widely by actual military experts, criticized by people like James Woolsey, John Bolton, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, Claire Lopez, Frank Gaffney, people with actual knowledge of what Iran was all about, were screaming from the rooftops, as was the president of France, President Hollande, who was part of the deal, who kept trying to say in the media, what are you doing? We entered this negotiation and gave them everything they wanted. But here's the bottom line, folks. So the story goes in the New York Times. It's an outrage. Many insulting comments made about Congress by Ben Rhodes to the New York Times say we couldn't work with Congress, we had to work around him, largely acknowledging he engaged in a major league manipulation of the American people to get the deal done. Congress asked to have Ben Rhodes come and testify, requested that Ben Rhodes come and testify before the House, I don't have the name of the committee, but with the House committee, and Ben Rhodes is declining, President Obama is declining. So here are your takeaways. This is an outlandish and honestly dangerous story in America where we are today. We have a president and an administration completely circumvented the Senate. You know, the deal on treaties, as our founders wisely set up in the Constitution, is that any treaty a president enters must go through the Senate, must get 2/3 of the Senate to agree to it, because President Obama knew that no one in their right mind would agree to this Iranian deal. The president just didn't. He called it a deal, not a treaty. So folks, here are your takeaways. Do your own research, trust your instincts, don't get played by social media, use your common sense. You were right, the Iran deal was a rotten deal. We're going to zip off to a break, but coming up after a break, we have an interview with Senator Jim DeMint, president of Heritage Foundation, and with a brilliant idea for how people who actually care about getting education for low-income children can get it.